Welcome to the video, friends. This video is going to be on families with a sociopathic parent and how they tend towards sociopathic organization or the formation of sociopathic hierarchies. So basically, another name for a sociopathic family or a sociopathic organization that happens to be biologically related is a cult, right? Basically, what sociopaths do is they foster a network of codependencies in people around them. That's the only way that they can relate to other people. They seed codependencies and they proactively foster them in order to gain control and leverage over other people. And they do it with the sensitivity to the dominant governing force. Like, they won't do anything illegal most of the time, but they'll just skirt the line. They'll be right there and they'll be safe, but then they will have power and leverage and control over other people through this process of relating. So basically, even though it's their own family members or their sons or their daughters or their brothers or their sisters or whoever it is, whatever relatives they are, really what's happening is a cult is forming. They're forming cults around them rather than um, like a normal family with issues. All families have their issues and their tensions, but there's a fundamental foundation of caring that's completely different. No matter how intense issues are, if there's a fundamental fabric of caring and kindness, then that's something that's different. What we're talking about is the formation of cults that just happen to be biologically related. Okay. Um, so the pattern by which a sociopath will form this type of cult, right? So you have a sociopath and they're going to seek out a partner that's either codependent or is also a sociopath, right? Um, and why they're going to do this is either they're going to, sociopaths are kind of like wolves. They want to depend, they want to completely submit, or they want to have complete submission, right? There's no such thing as respecting one another. It's like either they're the sub-sociopath to another sociopath, or they're the ones who get the submission, right? And the codependent person is someone they can fully control and kind of turn into a sociopath in relationship to other people. What they'll do is they'll foster the codependence in the person, and the more control and leverage they gain over the codependent person, the more influence they have in their personality, and slowly and gradually the codependent person, if they're not able to resist or to recognize or to withdraw in some way, they will literally become an agent for the sociopath. They will literally be an agent. Whatever the sociopath wants, they'll be an extension of their will, basically. Maybe they'll have some level of tension with the sociopath directly, but in relative to other people, in the way they relate to other people, they're going to serve the agenda of the dominant sociopath. Um, So once the sociopath and the codependent or the other sociopath, they have children, the children will either identify with one or the other, right? If they're both sociopaths, it doesn't really matter. But if they're going to identify with the codependent, or they're going to identify with the sociopath. Now, if they identify with the sociopath, what's going to happen is they're going to take all the family members, like for me, the maternal and the paternal family, right? But if you're like non-traditional and you're not close to your family, whatever like social group there is around their parents growing up, what they're going to do is they're going to take all the sociopathic traits of the same gender sociopaths. They're going to take on all the sociopathic traits of the same gender sociopaths around them or the narcissist around them, and they're going to hybrid and average the style of sociopathy from all the same male sociopaths, basically. And if they identify as codependent, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to pick and choose all the codependent traits from the codependent same gender around them. So for me, I was a codependent male. So my mom, because I identified with my mom, who was the victim, who was the codependent. My dad was a sociopath, so I reacted against my father. And so anytime someone had those type of traits that my father had, the sociopathic traits, I would really like go against that. And every time I found someone who had like opposite traits, who was kind of codependent like my mom, I would like put them on a pedestal, right? And so you go through that process and you differentiate into becoming more and more sociopathic, or becoming more and more codependent. And if you go more fundamental, what these two traits are fundamentally is a sociopath is very agentic, and they're very process oriented, and they have no inhibition. They're not thinking so much as they're living and doing. But but by that process, what they're doing is they're creating a lot of inhibition in some people, right? And the codependent is basically someone who has a lot of inhibition, is addicted to the permission of the sociopath. They need the permission of the sociopath, and that's why they end up feeling addicted. They find different addictions, and they feel helpless. They feel totally helpless. The sociopath makes them feel totally helpless. Okay, so the child will blend and average the same gender sociopathy or same gender codependence found on both sides of their closest family. The only distinction will be that the sub-sociopath, so like my sister was a sub-sociopath in our family, right? So she strongly took on the traits of my father and other um, not just my father, but my paternal aunts and my maternal aunts who were both sociopathic, or on that scale or that spectrum. She took on their traits and their attributes and kind of blended them. And I grew up resisting that, so I was very sensitive. Like recent interactions, because I've been away for a few years with her, have been literally like kind of at once seeing the worst in both sides of my like female family, seeing the worst of both sides, like hybrid in her, right? That's her character, that's who she is. And so they kind of do that, and you can see it if you're sensitive to it. So these sub-sociopaths will completely submit to the dom-sociopath, and because the dom-sociopath is the parent, right? There's no way for a child to really become the dom-sociopath, like maybe at the end of their life or something. But so the parent always tends to be the dom-sociopath. And so all the sub-sociopaths, because their benefits and their self-interest are all derived from the dom-sociopath, and they get that the sociopath isn't really a moral person who actually cares. Everything is transactional, so if you serve his agenda, he might reward you, and that's how it works. That's the game that's playing. The sub-sociopath gets that, whereas the codependent kid doesn't really get it. Like the sub-sociopath gets it. And so they basically, in relationship, maybe they have their own tensions with the sociopath, but in relationship to like the codependent sibling or any codependent or anyone other than the dom sociopath, they're going to be an agent of the dom sociopath's will. They're going to be enacting the agenda of the dom sociopath in relationship to that person. So for me personally, I've had experiences where my sister has convinced me to trust my dad, or my aunt has convinced me to trust my dad. And why is that? Not because not because so much that they want to hurt me, or they care about me. Like they made it seem like they care about me, and that's why they're really going to get him to follow through this time. But they didn't make the slightest effort when he stopped coming through. It's because he wanted me to trust him. And so, as his agents and enacting his agenda, they got me to trust him, right? So that is how those kind of dynamics work in a family, or at least a sociopathic family. And the only distinction between like a sub-sociopath and the codependent is they're both going, like the codependent will consciously resist, but unconsciously, because those dependencies have been fostered from childhood. Realistically, the sociopath is still going to have a large degree of control over um, over the child, or over whatever sibling from the family. He's still going to have a large degree of control the way he has over the sub-sociopath, but at least the codependent kid will consciously resist, right? Because that's where the idea of codependence comes from, is like they're obviously having conflict. If you completely submitted, so you would actually be one of the, like, I was the oldest son, so if I actually submitted to my sociopathic father, I would have gotten be the champion of the family, you know. But I just couldn't tolerate the way he treated my mom growing up. Being the oldest, I saw all of it, and so I couldn't ever take on that role. So, but the real difference, even though I consciously resisted because those dependencies had been built in and they're continuing to be fostered, the tension is he's using the codependencies to harm me, to betray my trust, to gain advantage over me, to devastate my life in various ways. Um, but at the same time, we're still kind of in relationship. He's using the relationship, and I'm consciously resisting. But at the same time, I'm giving him power, and that's the thing, because it just takes time. When I finally really got out of it, 31, about 32, it just takes time for you to get out of it. So anyways, this all leads to divergent styles and structures of sociopathy. So it's not always going to be like the father's a sociopath or mother's a sociopath. So let me give you an example of two different structures of sociopathic families that I grew up with. One is mine and one is like a parallel, right? So one family had a sociopathic mom and a sociopathic son, and one had a sociopathic father and a codependent son. That's me, right? Now, because there's a sociopathic mother, and the sociopathic son served her agenda completely, they were completely in sync, and she was really high powered, and she had maybe financial backing and privilege and sophistication and all this, and she created like wealth for her family. So he got to have this privileged life where he had the best of everything and got to be the best of everything, right? And then, my mother kind of came from something like that, but she was codependent because she kind of came from it. And then she latched onto my dad. And because I couldn't identify with my dad and I was resistant to my father's sociopathy, he did the opposite to me, where the mother sociopath raised her son. My father diminished me because I didn't identify with him. I wasn't his sub-sociopath, which it would be immoral to be, right? So that's kind of how the dynamics work. It just comes down to which child identifies and submits to the agenda of the sociopath most completely and perfectly. And obviously what this does is, as you get older, right? So we had 3 children in our family, and so two of them submitted and one of me, I didn't, right? So now there's 2 of them, and they get all the kind of resources behind them. They get everything invested in them. And there's less competition. So when there's less competition, they also kind of have their own tensions. But see, once I'm out of the picture, those are the only 2, and then they get to have more conflict, right? And that's kind of how sociopath and sociopathic hierarchies work, where they take out the moral first, but then they're also competing amongst themselves, right? They'll take out the moral, they'll take out the good, they'll take out the other first, but they're going to keep competing amongst themselves, and it's not like they're completely unified or joined either. So that's the video, and I will talk to you guys soon. Good night.